There we are. We are now joined by Greg Ives, the crew chief of the number 88 Chevy Good Chevrolet for Hendrick Motorsports, as we get ready to head into the tricky triangle Pocono Raceway this weekend for a NASCAR Cup Series doubleheader. Greg, how exciting and how challenging will it be for you to be running back-to-back days at a track like Pocono?
Well, fortunately for us, the doubleheader is going to be new to us, but, our friends over at JRM just experienced that at Homestead a couple weeks ago. So, talking to, Dave Ellens and Travis Mack and those guys, the crew chiefs over there, just getting some of their ideas and their problems they had to fight. I know on the 9 car, they had to replace some body panels and those type of things. So, it's definitely going to be new, exciting, kind of a little bit of I grew up short track racing myself and having twin 125s and those type of things. Obviously different scenarios, different days, but, it's definitely going to be fun to do something different.
Good deal. Well, we're going to open up the floor for questions. If you do have a question for Greg, click on the participants icon and raise your hand. We'll get to as many questions as possible. We're going to start with Bob Pockris from Fox Sports. Go ahead with your question, Bob.
Yeah, Greg, if I read the rules right, it looks like you may have like 8 to 9 hours to work on the car from Saturday to Sunday. I mean, how much can you – that sounds like a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a lot of time until you're down to the last 20, 30 minutes. So, typically that's what the race teams do. They utilize every minute they possibly can, either to make their car better or to double check things. We have a full list of items that we're going to either check or inspect to make sure that we don't have any issues. Who knows what type of incidents we're going to run into. You're planning for, some pushing on restarts. So are you going to have tail or rear bumper damage that doesn't necessarily make you want to go to a backup car, but does you have to fix it before you go back into the next race. So there's a lot of things like that you don't have the luxury of your fabricators at the track, the roller arms to make sure it's right. So that all takes time and multiple runs maybe through the Hawkeye system. And, that 9 hours is going to go by pretty quick. And I think NASCAR is putting that amount of time in just because it's new. Let's not try to hit a home run the first time out. Make sure these guys have enough time to diagnose any issues they may have. And then, the next time we do this, maybe we can trim back some time.
And you guys obviously have to have backup cars this weekend. That's been a reason why there hasn't been practice or qualifying. How close do you think you guys are to being able to have backup cars every weekend if NASCAR wanted to start having any practice or qualifying?
I think the one thing that the backup cars cause an issue with is the workforce in the shop. Just having to prepare 2 cars each week and do that without maybe all 100% personnel in the shop. That tends to make for some long hours, and what happens when people work long hours, they can tend to get grumpy, and we don't want that to happen. This is a fun sport and enjoy doing what we love to do. But, the eliminating some of the midday week races, the Wednesday races helps that. But all in all, you just have to look at the pro of having practice versus what we're doing already. I feel like, what we have right now as product on the racetrack is pretty good. And, that is without a backup car. That's without qualifying. That's without practice. So I think for the short term to continue on like this is probably the best way to go.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Jeff Gluck. Go ahead with your question, Jeff.
Yeah, Greg, I'm just wondering, from a crew chief standpoint, you said, it looks like the shows have been better or they've been good without practice and, these single day shows and stuff. When things get back to sort of normal, are you itching to see practice back? Do you think that the teams can go without practice in the future? How do you see it?
Well, I would like to see practice come back just from the sense of, I have some things I like to try to make the car better. you can run as much simulation and run into DIL as much as possible, but getting it on the racetrack is the true test, the true feel from the driver and also the stopwatch. So, I definitely would like to do that. Being in the playoffs, usually this time is used for experimenting and finding that next tenth or two, which is so hard to find in this sport because of how close everything is with rules and the competition. So I would like to have practice, not necessarily because I think it's going to make the racing better on Sunday, easier for the guys in the shop. But I just feel like from my standpoint, I go to test to make my car better, and that's, as a crew chief, that's what you want to be able to do. So that's where I would like to do. Have a little bit more time on the track without actually racing.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Daryl Kinsey Jr. Go ahead with the question, Daryl.
Greg, with everything that's going on with the COVID-19 pandemic, you guys now find yourselves in a unique position where you have two races at the same racetrack on the same weekend. So it's almost like you get a practice session now with the race on Saturday and Sunday. What are the things you're going to be able to adjust on between Saturday and Sunday to make the car better, depending on how Alex is feeling?
Well, you really can't change the body configuration. If you can to a certain point, if you come there with a more of a downforce car versus, you hear that a lot, I had too much drag in the car. It's going to be difficult probably to change that style. There's some tweaks you can make to get some of the drag off, or maybe put some downforce in. But you can't obviously completely rebuild the whole car. But, from a spring, shocks, trailing arm, camber settings, those type of things, you definitely can adjust. By the time end of stage one, usually my engineer's over there, hey, we should have done this, or we should have done that, or I already got a laundry list of items going of, what we need to adjust. And that's not even for a doubleheader. So, fortunately for us, I feel like we've had good baselines, good foundation each week, and had a lot of speed. Just got to figure out how to execute and finish some of these races. And I think, for Pocono, I think the strategy side of things you're going to see how different people adjust. And, they may do one strategy on Saturday and one strategy on Sunday. And that's going to definitely be interesting to see how that plays out.
Our next question will come from Claire B. Lang with SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. Go ahead with your question, Claire.
You got it. I want to ask you, of all the things that might happen when you have a doubleheader weekend, we haven't really seen anything quite like this, no practice, no qualifying. What are you most intrigued to find out? What don't you know that you're like, wow, this is really going to be interesting for a crew chief?
Yeah, over the course of every year, every race, the track gains character. And what I mean by character is the bumps, whether, Pocono, for example, it started out a pretty smooth racetrack. You could stiffen up your front wheel rates and mainly work on the attitude of the car and get that so it really doesn't move like a go-kart. But as the character of the track comes in, over the tunnel, it gets a little bit more bumps, and now people complain about the front end washing out because it hit a bump and it pushes up the racetrack. Now you got to start working a little more on handling and ride quality, and those are the things that you can't really predict when you don't have practice. Typically, if you show up, you have a couple laps, driver comes in and says, yeah, I'm hitting the splitter too hard, we need a little softer front wheel rate, or it's just way too rigid. You can work on that. Once you get into the race, it's definitely difficult to know that, or even change it once those laps start clicking off. So the character of the track, you've probably even seen at Talladega, not a lot of people probably talked about it, but that new tunnel in the entry of turn 3, you could see the cars moving around a lot more, and you didn't know that until actually either watching a race, the ARCA cars or the Xfinity cars. But once we got out there, definitely saw some different things like that.
And then who do you think benefits from this kind of schedule? You know, the bigger teams, 2 races in a weekend, drivers who race a lot, drivers with experience, veterans, young guys who don't know any better. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think those who kind of have it together with a good foundation, like I said, we were able to start the year when we had practice, dial in our setup a little bit, and was able to come back after once we started racing again and have some really strong runs, and potentially could have had multiple wins. And as the weeks start clicking off, everybody starts honing back in on what they need to compete, either getting their cars better, setups better, drivers knocking the rust off, teams correlating their splitter heights and what the tires need for air pressure and grip. I think just having that solid baseline to start with, and not trying to hit a home run, and we know this package is going to race well, so let's not try to reinvent the wheel and just go out there and have a solid foundation. So obviously the bigger teams are able to feed off each other. I have a lot of great teammates at Hendrick Motorsports that I can lean on for advice and what their thoughts are going into each week. And so I think it tailors a little bit better to the bigger teams and those who have more experience. And the smaller teams, it's just maybe taking a couple weeks to kind of hone in on what they need.
Thanks and good luck.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Dustin Long. Go ahead with your question, Dustin.
Yeah, Greg, had a couple of things. I wanted to ask you just about Pocono and Indianapolis. Obviously, in the past, people looked at as being able to take from what you got from Pocono into Indianapolis. Is that still a case when you talk about the character of Pocono? And I also think about, at Indianapolis, you're not going to have, there won't be any rubber on that track when you guys go out there to race other than on the straightaway since they're using the road course. So is there much that carries over from Pocono to Indy? Is Pocono a practice session for Indy, or there's not going to be much that's going to be relevant next weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything's relevant. I feel like as a crew chief, every lap I learn that I make, whether it's at, when we used to test at Nashville or Kentucky back in the day to down in New Smyrna, every lap we learn. So, Pocono definitely has a lot of characteristics with the flat corners in some sense, and understanding what that your package is going to do there. And like I said, the character of Pocono is just going to be a little bit different than Indy. How your car is going to draft on the front straightaway and suck up versus at Indy on those their long straightaways. So there's a lot of similarities that you can definitely pull from. If you feel like you selected the wrong aero package at Pocono, it's probably going to be the wrong one at Indy. And you're going to do some more things to maybe trim the car out, or vice versa. You're going to need to, you trim the car out too much and you need to still handle at Indy. So there's definitely a lot of similarities. And like you said, you can learn from Pocono. You can learn what not to do to bring to Indy. Ultimately, definitely different character of each track. So it's not a complete, hey, I just won Pocono, now I'm going to go win Indy because of this package. That's probably not the best way to think about it, but it definitely correlates a lot. And when it comes down to strategy as well, both tend to have, the fuel mileage race and that strategy at the end of each stage to win stage points or to put yourself in the best position at the end of the race. So a lot of similarities, a lot of things that you can carry over, but it's not a complete one-off,
Also, Greg, certainly, I'm sure you're aware that this area here in the Charlotte area, the North Carolina area, more coronavirus cases, and certainly North Carolina is one of the more, not as hot of a spot as certainly maybe Texas, Arizona, and Florida, but certainly an area of concern. I'm curious, how does that affect the guidance that you give your team, to protect themselves? Obviously, they're doing things in the shop, they're working from home, but I'm just wondering if there's extra guidance on, telling them not to go into stores or things like that. Is that impacting how you're selecting your crew members on travel, whether they're impacted by COVID or just wanting to keep, they not feeling comfortable to travel in some situations.
Yeah, definitely. It's on an individual basis. You have to have those conversations with each guy that you have on your team, from like you just said, that comfort level of them traveling to different areas. And I've had that conversation with them. The other thing is, everybody at Hendrick Motorsports taking this time seriously, right? When we are traveling to Pocono, the number one thing, how do we, are we going to feed our guys and supply them what food they need? And, it may sound trivial, but not having them go to restaurants to potentially expose them. And we have come up with plans where basically we get them the meal that they need, so they're only going to one location. Making sure they eat at the track versus going out to somewhere else. And those type of things, even from how we are feeding the guys to how we are protecting them, is definitely very, very much important to not only myself, but everybody at Hendrick Motorsports. And, I feel like we're doing it the best way, the safest way. And, for those who may be uncomfortable in those scenarios or situations, we're definitely hearing their voice and taking the proper protocol.
Thank you.
Well, Greg, really appreciate you taking the time this morning. Good luck this weekend at the Tricky Triangle.
I appreciate it. You guys have a great day. Thanks it was great seeing y'all.
It's good seeing you too.